Before going to Troy, Odysseus knew that he would only be able to return to the islands of Ithaca 20 years later and reunite with his son Telemachus and his wife Penelope. 10 years had passed in Troy, and in the remaining 10 years, his ship was battered on the oceans. He had lost all his companions, and finally, in the 20th year of his departure, he was able to return home, nearly dying. Before returning from Troy, Odysseus and his friends had occupied the region where the Ciconians lived. However, they also suffered very heavy losses in their struggle with them. Afterwards, they struggled with the Lotus Eaters, who forgot all their troubles and responsibilities by just sitting and eating lotus, being fond of pleasure and enjoyment. Odysseus had to drag his friends who tasted the lotus to the ship and take them by force. While they were still under the influence of the lotus, they had to fight the Cyclops Polyphemus. The Cyclops were one-eyed, colossal giants. They possessed fertile lands where all kinds of produce grew and were rich prosperous for fluffy goats and sheep. Wishing to meet the natives of such a region, Odysseus anchored one of the ships in the harbor and stepping ashore with his companions, entered the cave of the Cyclops Polyphemus. One of Poseidon's sons, Polyphemus, was outside grazing his sheep and did not return until sunset. So Odysseus and his companions began waiting for him inside the cave. The Cyclops was a huge and terrifying creature, and after cursorily asking his unexpected guest a few questions about where they came from and what they did for a living, he grabbed several of Odysseus' companions, squeezed them until their brains spattered out, and then began eating them. The Cyclops then fell into a very deep sleep. Odysseus thought about killing him with a blade, but immediately gave up on the idea, because if he did so, it would be impossible for them to escape from there. The Cyclops had placed a giant rock at the entrance of the cave, one that Odysseus and his companions could never live together, but which he himself could toss aside with a single hand. For breakfast, the Cyclops ate two more of Odysseus' companions and went outside. As he left, he carefully placed the rock back at the entrance of the cave. The cunning Odysseus immediately made a plan, and shaping a piece of wood he found in the cave to a point at the end, hardened it in the fire. When evening came, Polyphemus returned to his cave and Odysseus offered him a strong bowl of wine that would make him forget his Greek travelers. The Cyclops finished the wine in one gulp and drank 3 more bowls on top of it. Becoming drunk immediately, the Cyclops began to doze off. Before falling asleep, he asked Odysseus for his name, and he replied that his name was Otis, which means nobody in Greek. In return for the wine, the Cyclops promised. When evening came, Polyphemus returned to his cave and Odysseus offered him a strong bowl of wine that would make him forget his Greek travelers. The Cyclops finished the wine in one gulp and drank 3 more bowls on top of it. Becoming drunk immediately, the Cyclops began to doze off. Before falling asleep, he asked Odysseus for his name, and he replied that his name was Otis, which means nobody in Greek. In return for the wine, the Cyclops promised Odysseus that he would eat him last. When the creature fell asleep, and Odysseus ate the tip of wooden stake until it was glowing red, and together with his best friends thrust it into the Cyclops' single eye. The creature's eye began to hiss and sizzle like an axe that a blacksmith dips in cold water to harden it. Waken up in terrible pain, the Cyclops began to roar and scream to ask for help from the other neighbor Cyclops. However, when the neighbor Cyclops gathered in front of the cave and asked who was bothering him, upon receiving the answer, nobody, they thought that nobody was bothering him and returned to their caves. This cunning plan of Odysseus had worked. Towards dawn, Odysseus and his friends prepared to escape from the cave. Each man tied himself beneath the take-placed ship, while Odysseus tied himself beneath a ram that was the leader of the herd. The blind Cyclops removed the rock from the entrance of the cave and sat at the entrance to catch Odysseus and his friends. Odysseus and his friends, on the other hand, safely exited the cave under the ship and made their way to their ships. As they set sail, Odysseus could not help mocking the Cyclops, and the Cyclops hurled rocks toward the direction of the voice. Fortunately, he missed the sailing ships. Odysseus met with the rest of his army, and they mourned for their deceased companions and comforted themselves by feasting on the ship that had helped them escape the cave. After the island of Cyclops, Odysseus goes to Aeolia, the island of King Oeates. Zeus had given King Aeolus the power to control the winds. Aeolus and his extended family hosted Odysseus and his friends very hospitably, and when it was time to leave, Aeolus gave Odysseus a leather bag in which all the harsh winds were impressed. Odysseus a leather bag in which all the harsh winds were imprisoned. Then, so that the ships could travel safely to Ithaca, after sailing at sea for 10 days. Just as Ithaca summoned a gentle wind so that the ship could travel safely, just as Ithaca came into view, a great disaster befell Odysseus and his friends, having stayed awake during the entire journey because he was at the helm of the ship. Odysseus fell asleep, and his companions, not knowing what was inside the leather bag, suspected that Aeolus had given Odysseus a very valuable treasure. Thinking that they had endured the same hardships as Odysseus, his friends envied him and felt that they should share this treasure. For this reason, they opened the leather bag, and thus those harsh winds inside the bag were set free. Odysseus woke up to the sounds of a terrible storm that had dragged the ship all the way back to Aeolia. This time, Aeolus received them in a very different manner. They begged Aeolus to give them another chance, but Aeolus refused to help and banished them. From Aeolia, believing that Odysseus was someone hated by the gods. At their next stop, Lastragonia, all ships except Odysseus were destroyed by the creatures living on the island. In great sorrow and pain, Odysseus and his surviving companions found themselves on the island Aea. After coming ashore, they lay on the beach for 2 days, exhausted from their struggles and demoralized by the events they had faced. On the 3rd day, Odysseus set out to explore the island and saw smoke rising from a hill in the forest. Remaining cautious, Odysseus decided not to go there immediately, and returned to his companions to tell them what he had seen. Remembering the last Argonians until Cyclops, his companions were quite reluctant to embark on a new adventure. However, Odysseus was determined to go on his exploration and divided his companions into two groups, taking leadership of one group himself. He gave the other to Eurylochus. The two groups drew lots, and the task of going there fell to Eurylochus and his team. Odysseus, on the other hand, stayed on the ship with his own team. Immediately afterward, Eurylochus and his team set off toward the house in the forest. Wolves and lions along the way leaped and attacked the man. But these were actually humans. Advised Odysseus on how he should kill Circe. When Circe touched him with her wand, he was supposed to attack her. Thus, Circe would shrink back in fear and want to be with Odysseus. Odysseus would have to accept, provided that he got a promise from Circe that she would not set a trap for him. Everything happened exactly as Hermes had predicted. After Circe and Odysseus were together, Circe washes and beautifully dresses Odysseus. She prepares a lowly table for him, but Odysseus sits without speaking at all. Finally, Circe asks him what is wrong. Odysseus says that as long as his friends are in the pigsty, he would not to be a good husband to Circe. Circe immediately brings the pigs out of the pigsty and casting spell on them, turns them back into humans. But now they all look much younger and more handsome than before. Odysseus and his friends are overjoyed, and Circe wants the rest of the crew to be brought there as well so they can celebrate all together. Odysseus and his friends stay with Circe for a whole year and die eating, drinking, and having fun. They forget all the bad events they had been through. Finally, some of his companions remind Odysseus of Ithaca. Before setting out of Ithaca, Circe warned Odysseus that he must go to the underworld, consult the Theban prophet Tiresias. Only Tiresias could inform him on how to return home. Thereupon Odysseus crossed river Oceanus and anchored near Persephone's grove of poplars. Here he dug a trench and poured honey, water, milk, and wine around it in honor of the dead. Over the trench he sacrificed a goat and a black sheep. Smelling the blood, the spirits of the dead came to the trench to drink it. Odysseus drew his sword and scared them off. The spirit he was actually waiting for was that of the prophets. The first to approach the trench was Elpenor, one of Odysseus' companions. Elpenor had died on the morning they were to leave Circe's house by falling from the roof, and since Odysseus and his crew had to set off, his body had been left there unwashed and unburied. Odysseus promised his spirit that he would make all of this right. When Tiresias arrived, Odysseus allowed him to drink from the blood, and the prophets told Odysseus that he could return home safely. However, he absolutely had to avoid plundering the cattle of the sun on. He also warned him that upon arriving in Ithaca, he would encounter many greedy suitors of his faithful wife Penelope. After receiving all the necessary information from the prophets, Odysseus allowed the other ghosts to approach the trench and drink the blood. Thus, Odysseus would be able to speak with every ghost that drank from that blood. The first ghost to arrive was Odysseus' mother. His mother told him how she had died, the miserable condition of his father Laertes, and his wife Penelope's brave efforts to fend off her suitors. Listening to his mother in sorrow, Odysseus tried 3 times to embrace her, to comfort her. However, each time his mother's ghost slipped right through his arms. Other ghosts also came and spoke with Odysseus. The ghost of Agamemnon told Odysseus about his bloody death. Then came the ghost of Achilles, and Odysseus greeted him as though greeting the most important person who had ever lived on earth, the most supreme prince among all the living and the dead. Achilles, on the other hand, told him that he would rather be a slave among the living than a king among the dead. Odysseus managed to make him happy by talking about the bravery of Achilles' son Neoptolemus, and Achilles left Odysseus' side content. During his visit to the underworld, Odysseus encountered many of its famous inhabitants. Sisyphus was constantly rolling the rock the cat kept slipping and falling from his hands as soon as he pushed it to the very top of the mountain. Tantalus was in water up to his neck, and there were all kinds of fruits above his head. But when he reached out his hand to it, the fruits disappeared, and when he bent his head to drink water, the waters vanished. Odysseus continued to wander in curiosity, and met the ghost of the brave Hercules, encountering the ghosts of many more heroes as well. Odysseus eventually became overwhelmed, and returning to his ship in panic, weighed anchor and set off toward the realm of the living. Odysseus returned to Circe's islands, and after burying Elpenor, he also received information from Circe regarding the hardships he would encounter during his journey. First, the ship was to pass by the island of the Sirens. First, the ship was to pass by the island of the Sirens, strange creatures with the head and voice of a woman, but the body of a bird. Sirens were creatures that lured sailors and trapped them on their island, thanks to beautiful songs they sang. As Odysseus' ship approached the island, the sea fell into a deadly stillness. and the men took their places at the oars. Upon, upon, upon Circe's warning, Odysseus flooded his men's ears with beeswax. His men's ears with beeswax. He had himself tied to the ship's mast. In this way, his men would be able to carry him to a place away from danger while allowing him to listen to the sun. These sirens began to sing. Come closer, Odysseus. No sailor was ever passed from here without listening to sweet melodies flowing from our lips. He knew everything that happened in Troy by the will of the gods, and everything that will happen on this fertile earth from now on. Odysseus was enchanted by the siren's song and shouted at his men to stop, but none of them heard his pleas, and thus they escaped danger.